Hello, this is Dave from the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana, and today I figured I'd continue counting down my series of top 80 board games of all time, with this video counting down number 40 to 31. And to start off with number 40 is Quadropple. Now, Quadropple is a city-building tile-laying game where you take different type of tiles, either like apartment buildings or shops or factories, and you place them in different locations, or you kind of draft them, but at the same time you also place them on your own kind of city board to gain victory points based on how they are associated with other buildings. For example, your apartment buildings will generate population and use that population to populate your factories and populate your shops to get resources that give you victory points. One thing I really like about the Quadropple is kind of the puzzle of it, because as you're trying to, you have to figure out which tiles you're drafting, and then also in addition to that, where you're placing the tiles on your city board to interact with the other tiles. And that's what I like about Quadropple. My number 39th board game is kind of like a combo board game / miniature game, and that is Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl is true fantasy football. Where I mean by that, when most people think about fantasy football, they're thinking about drafting real players and gaining some sort of points based off the stats of how they perform in an actual football game. And Blood Bowl, it's true fantasy, where you play different fantastical races like elves and dwarves and orcs. And based on those races, they have different advantages. So like the elves are really agile, so they're really good at doing the typical football or skill actions like passing and catching and dodging and weaving in between other players. Where somebody like an orc team or a dwarf team are more slow and lumberous, but they're really good at beating other people up, which in Blood Bowl is legal. So maybe if some elf's got a ball and they're trying to get away to score a touchdown, you can have your orc come up and clobber them from behind, knocking the ball out of their hands, smashing the elf in the process, which gives you some sort of star player points, which you can later use to upgrade or give new skills to your players. And that's really part of the fun of Blood Bowl. Is as an individual game, it's fine, but where it really shines is kind of like a league or campaign game where you can like level up your players, sort of like an RPG. And that's what I like about Blood Bowl. My number 38th game is kind of a horror classic game, and that is Betrayal at House on the Hill. And Betrayal at House on the Hill, the game starts off as a cooperative game, so all the players are kind of working together. You've kind of entered into this haunted house, and you're kind of exploring and building the house. So as you go through an empty door, you grab a tile and lay it out in front of you to kind of expand the house. You've added a new room. When you go into that new room, it's going to have a symbol on it. Either an event happens in the room based on the symbol, or you might find an item in that room, or you might find an omen, which usually is like some sort of like a super item that your character gets to keep. Also, though, when you find an omen, you make a die roll. And if you roll less than the number of omen cards drawn by all the players, then you trigger what is called the haunt. At that point, one of the players is going to become a traitor. And that's determined by which omen card you drew and what room you drew it in. At that point, you kind of pause the game for a moment. Whoever is the traitor will take the traitor's handbook, usually go into the other room, where they read what it is they're trying to do or what scenario that they're playing to try to win the game. Where everybody else probably stays in the room, they open the hero's book and they read from that manual to let them know what it is they're trying to do to win the game. And there's like 50 different scenarios in this game, so every time you play it, it's a new experience. And the game usually takes about 45 minutes to an hour, so most of the time when I play it, we tend to play multiple games in a row, because part of the fun of the game is each person getting a chance to be the traitor. And that's what I like about Betrayal at House on the Hill. It just does a really great job of kind of capturing the theme of this kind of twisted, haunted mansion. And that's why it is my number 38. My number 37th favorite game is kind of my go-to gateway game when it comes to like teaching new players, or if I have somebody come into the Wizard's Keep and they say they got some kids or a family they're trying to get into games, I always mention this game, and that is King of Tokyo. King of Tokyo is kind of like a Yahtzee variant game. And so it's a dice rolling game where each player has like their own kind of like Godzilla, King Kong like monsters, and you're vying to become the King of Tokyo. And how that works is there's two ways. You can either win by getting to 20 stars or victory points first, or you can win by being the last monster standing. And how you do that is on your turn, you're going to roll dice, like I said, like Yahtzee style. So you roll your 6 dice, and you decide which of those dice you want to keep, which ones you want to re-roll, and so on. And then, based on the symbols you get after your last re-roll, you're either going to gain some victory points or do some damage to your opponent, or you might gain, you might be able to heal your monster. Or the last thing you can get is like these lightning bolts on the dice, which give you energy cubes. You take those energy cubes and you can spend those like currency to buy different cards that are laid out in the game. And the benefit of those cards, basically each card is like different powers or upgrades for your monster that you can give them, like an extra head, which gives you more dice. Or they might get like fire breath, which will give them extra damage when they attack. So it's a real fast-paced game. It's pretty simple, so it's easy for a wide range of players to be able to play, and that's why I like King of Tokyo. My number 36th game is the classic deck-building game, the one that kind of started it all for deck-building games, and that is Dominion. Dominion is kind of like the deck-building game in its purest form, meaning that each player will start with a deck of 10 cards, which is exactly the same. In the case of Dominion, it's 7 copper pieces, which is basically like each copper piece is like a 1 money unit piece, and 3 victory point cards. What you do on your turn is you have kind of like 2 actions that you can take. You can take a buy action, which means you can spend the money that you have in your hand to buy a new card and add it to your deck, or you can play an action card from your hand. Those are kind of like your default settings, but there are different action cards you can play that might give you more buy actions or more ability to play more action cards or ability to draw more cards. So at first, your first few turns are kind of simple. You maybe play a card, buy a card, and that's it. But by the end of the game, it's going to snowball as you kind of make your deck more efficient. You're getting new action cards. So at the beginning of the game, it starts off small, but by your last turns, they're going to be really, really dynamic turns as you maybe drawing tons of cards and playing lots of different actions. And that's part of the fun of Dominion, is that kind of engine building. And ultimately, how you win the game is you're buying different victory point cards, which you're going to put in your deck. So when the game's over, whoever has the most victory points is going to win. But you got to find a balance with that, because if you get basically victory point cards are generally just dead cards. They don't do anything, so they kind of clog your deck, but they're important because it's what you need to win. So you have to find a balance between getting victory points and building your engine. Because I've played this game a couple times where one game I was doing all sorts of neat dynamic things. I was drawing tons of cards and playing lots of actions, and every turn I almost would draw and play my entire deck, but I ended up becoming in last place because I didn't buy any victory point cards, and that's why my deck was doing so well, is because I didn't have these victory points cards clogging it up. So looks can be deceiving sometimes as you're playing. The other thing, though, is the other extreme, is if you buy too many victory point cards at the beginning without buying enough cards to kind of build your engine, then your deck's going to stall out. You're going to have several turns where you just draw victory point cards. So those turns are kind of like waste of turns. You don't do anything. So there's a lot of different choices and a lot of different strategy you have to do in Dominion, and that's why I like it. My number 35th favorite game is a game called 5 Tribes. In 5 Tribes, it uses what's called a Mancala mechanic, which is kind of a classic hundreds or maybe thousands-year-old game called Mancala. But how it plays in 5 Tribes is that you're going to have a board with a bunch of different tiles on the board, and on those tiles are going to be groups of little wooden meeples. On your turn, you pick one of those tiles, you pick up all the meeples from that tile, and then in order, you kind of walk them around the board, dropping a meeple off on each tile as you go. Wherever you land with the last meeple, as long as it has to share a color with, because there's different colored meeples, and as long as it shares a color with the tile that you last placed the meeple on, then you're going to pick up all the meeples of the same color, and based on the color of that meeple, it's going to generate a different action. Sometimes giving you victory points, sometimes allowing you to gain money or get these different set collection goods that can give you victory points at the end of the game. Also, based on the tile that you last land on, you're also going to trigger an action from that tile. So basically, each turn, when you pick up your group of meeples and walk them around the board, you're going to kind of get two actions based on the color of the meeple and based on the tile that you last finish off of. What I like about the game is this kind of puzzle as you're kind of figuring out which tile should you pick your meeples up from, and or if there's a particular tile you're like, I really want to get to the end of that tile, because if you clear off all the meeples from that tile, you also get to claim that tile, and that scores you victory points at the end of the game as well. So you might say, I really want to get to this certain tile because I want to trigger that action, or I want to be able to claim that tile. You have to look around the board and figure out, well, where can you pick meeples up from to be able to finish on the tile that you want. Also, you have to worry about, maybe because as you pick up meeples and place them around the board, you're changing the configuration of the board. So you have to be careful of maybe setting your opponents up as well for like dynamic or great moves. So there's a lot of different choices you have to make and things you have to consider. And that's why I like about Five Tribes. My number 34 favorite game is kind of a simple two-player game by Uwe Rosenberg, and that is Patchwork. Patchwork is kind of different for Uwe Rosenberg. He's mostly known for farming, feeding your people games. But in Patchwork, what you do is each player is trying to build your own quilt efficiently out of these different random scraps of Tetris-like patches or pieces. So what you do on your turn is that you have buttons which you spend as currency, but buttons are also victory points at the end of the game, so you have to consider that as well when you efficiently buying pieces. But you're going to buy these Tetris-like shaped pieces of patches and take them and try to place them on your board as efficiently as possible, trying to cover up the most space, because at the end of the game you're going to lose 2 points for every blank space that you have on the board. So you want to make sure you can make all those pieces fit together in order to not cost yourself that many victory points at the end of the game. And it's kind of a simple kind of game, but it's also really thinky as you're trying to efficiently place those pieces on your board. And that's what I like about Patchwork. My number 33rd favorite game, and really the last 3 games on this list, are all kind of, it makes sense that they kind of bunch together because they all have similar kind of concepts. They're all these storytelling games. They're almost RPG-like. And the first one of those group of 3 at 33 is Time Stories. In Time Stories, it's a cooperative game where you're all kind of working together and you're kind of trying to solve a different mission. It's sort of like the old TV show Sliders or Quantum Leap, if you're familiar with that. You're basically a group of people from the future that have been sent back in time to a particular era. And when you go back to that time, there's some sort of information you're trying to find or some sort of story you're trying to solve. But the way the game is set up is you're probably not going to solve the game the first time you play through, because you only have so much time, and each turn you're going to spend time as units for actions to do different things, to go down different paths as you're kind of exploring the story and learning different bits of information. But eventually you're going to run out of time. Your character is going to be sucked back to their present, and that kind of ends that mission. But it's not over then, because then you play the mission again, this time taking the information you learned from your first playthrough to be able to go through that story more efficiently. Either you can decide or figure out, like, oh, this route, when we went out to the forest, that was a dead end, so we know not to go there, so now we can save time by going a different direction. Or maybe going out to the forest was important, you learned a bit of information, but now you have that information, so you don't need to do it again, so the next time you play through, you can skip that and go to a different section to kind of get deeper and further into the story until you can finally solve it. And that's a really neat thing I like about Time Stories. It's got all these different puzzles you have to solve. I really like how the story kind of develops. And like I said, it's almost like an RPG. And that's what I like about Time Stories. My number 32nd favorite game is more like in the classic, almost Dungeons and Dragons-like RPG. And that is Descent. Descent is kind of like this dungeon crawl concept of like the classic Dungeons and Dragons. And there's 2 ways to play Descent. You can play Descent in its original traditional form, which is basically one person plays a game master and the other players each play a character, sort of like Dungeons and Dragons or an RPG. But in this game, the Dungeon Master's goal is try to win the game. So the Dungeon Master's controlling all of the monsters, and they're trying to kill the players in order to win the scenario, where the players are trying to kill the monsters and get the treasure and fulfill the objective of that particular scenario. I mean, that's okay, but it would, if that's the only way to play this game, it wouldn't be that high on my list, because I don't like that kind of when it comes to RPGs, I don't like a game master, a DM that's kind of this killer DM. So I don't think I would like Descent quite as much if that was the only way to play it. But they later developed an app, and the app will play the role of the game master. So it becomes at that point a game masterless D&D game. So, because some of the problems in a Dungeons and Dragons game or other role-playing games is trying to find that person that's willing to run the game, or that person has a lot of time to prepare adventures and things. Well, with the app and Descent, it's going to prepare everything for you, and you as a group of players can kind of just sit around the table, let the app decide where the monsters go, let the story unfold, and you can just concentrate on killing things and getting treasures and leveling up. And that's what I like about Descent. My number 31 favorite game is basically the same concept as Descent. It's a game masterless RPG game that uses an app, and the app runs all the monsters. And the only reason it really is a little bit higher, and that is Mansions of Madness, and the only reason it's a little bit higher is just because I like the theme of this one a lot better than Descent. Descent is kind of like your typical, not mindless, but somewhat mindless dungeon crawl, going through killing monsters, leveling up, getting treasure. It has a little bit of a story to it, but Mansions of Madness, which is based off of like the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos, really is dripping with the theme and the storyline. Now, it's the same kind of idea. Is you're kind of the app is kind of running the monsters, developing the scenario, kind of telling you which tiles to lay out as you're kind of even building this mansion, or maybe these gloomy city blocks that you're kind of exploring. But it also does a much better job of telling the story and of the kind of gothic horror, either with the sound effects or the mood music, or just it's more story driven. And that's why I put it just up a little bit higher in Descent, though they both feel like an RPG experience. And that's why I like Mansions of Madness. Well, thank you once again for watching this video. If you have any questions about any of these games or any other games, feel free to comment on YouTube or message me on Facebook or stop into the Wizard's Keep. Until next time, thank you for watching.